In the fog-choked heart of 1930s Ashford Manor, a scream shatters the night. Steel tycoon Sir Reginald Hawthorne slumps dead, a jewelled dagger in his back, ink bleeding like blood across his final will. Who poisoned the ink he licked? Who staged the stab? Was it the betrayed wife, the debt-drowned son, the secret daughter, the blackmailing doctor, or the ruined rival? One death, 4 killers, countless lies. As Hercule Poirot arrives, every alibi crumbles, every footprint leads to betrayal. In this house of concealed truths, the storm is coming, and the dawn will expose them all. Chapter 1. The Shadowed Manor. The fog arrived first, as it always did in Sussex, rolling in from the Channel like a conspirator in a grey cloak. It swallowed the hedgerows, muffled the church bells of Ashford Village, and crept up the gravel drive of Ashford Manor, until the great house itself seemed to float, unmoored, in a sea of pearl and ash. By the time the last crimson leaf had fallen from the copper beech, the fog had thickened to the consistency of wet wool. Inside the manor the chandeliers burned low, their crystal prisms scattering light into trembling shards across the damask walls. It was the 23rd of October, 1934, and Sir Reginald Hawthorne was about to die. The dinner gong had sounded at 8 o'clock precisely, its brazen note reverberating through corridors panelled in oak, the colour of congealed blood. 24 guests, family, retainers, a handful of business associates invited under the thin pretext of reconciliation, had filed into the dining hall beneath the painted gaze of Hawthorne ancestors whose eyes, even in oils, seemed to follow every movement. The table was a battlefield of silver and crystal, epergnes heavy with hothouse grapes, candelabra whose flames guttered whenever a footman passed too close, wine the shade of garnets decanted into goblets etched with the family crest, a mailed fist clutching a broken sword. Sir Reginald presided at the head, his broad shoulders straining the seams of a dinner jacket cut in Savile Row's most unforgiving style. At 62, he retained the vigour of a man who had clawed his way from the soot of Sheffield forges to the velvet of Mayfair drawing-rooms. His hair, iron grey and cropped close, caught the candlelight like filings drawn to a magnet. His eyes, the pale predatory blue of a winter sky, missed nothing. To his right sat Lady Eleanor Hawthorne, 30 years his junior, and still, after a decade of marriage, the most beautiful woman in any room she chose to enter. Her gown was black velvet, severe yet clinging, its neckline plunging just enough to scandalize the dowager aunt from Bath, who had been invited out of obligation rather than affection. A single strand of pearls, each the size of a thrush's egg, rested against the alabaster column of her throat. She smiled with the mechanical perfection of a porcelain doll, but her fingers worried at the stem of her wineglass until the crystal sang a thin, nervous note. Across from her, Victor Hawthorne, only son, heir presumptive and perpetual disappointment, slouched in his chair, the knot of his white tie already askew. At 29, he possessed his father's height, but none of his discipline. His face, handsome in the careless way of dissipated youth, was flushed with claret and something darker. He had arrived from London that afternoon in a Hispano-Suiza, borrowed from a friend whose name Sir Reginald had forbidden in the house. The car now stood beneath the portico, its bonnet ticking as it cooled, a chromium insult to the manor's weathered stone. At the table's far end, Miss Clara Beaumont, Sir Reginald's private secretary for 7 years, sat with the rigid posture of someone perpetually expecting rebuke. She was 26, slight of build, with hair the colour of strong tea, pinned in a chignon so severe it might have been carved from walnut. Her dress, dove-grey silk, was the only concession to evening attire. A cameo brooch at her throat depicted Minerva, goddess of wisdom and war. She ate little, her attention fixed on the leather-bound notebook open beside her plate. Every so often she made a notation in shorthand, so rapid it resembled the frantic semaphore of a drowning woman. To her left, Dr. Elias Thorne, the family physician, toyed with a bread roll, reducing it to crumbs with the precision of a man dissecting a cadaver. His hands were surgeon steady, the nails manicured to a pale gleam. His eyes, behind gold-rimmed spectacles, darted from face to face as though cataloguing symptoms. He had treated Sir Reginald for a heart murmur these past 18 months, prescribing digitalis in measured doses and cautioning against excitement. The warning had gone unheeded. Colonel Marcus Hale, late of the Indian Army and more lately a director of the rival Midland Steel Consortium, occupied the seat opposite Dr. Thorne. His moustache was waxed to rapier points. His dress uniform, though retired from active service, still bore the campaign ribbons of Mesopotamia and the northwest frontier. He had arrived that morning under a flag of truce, ostensibly to discuss a merger that would save both companies from the wolves of the Depression. The merger was a fiction. Everyone knew Sir Reginald intended to swallow Midland whole and spit out the bones. Yet the colonel drank his host's wine and smiled with the thin politeness of a man who has learned to conceal loathing behind courtesy. The meal progressed through 7 courses, with the stately inevitability of a funeral cortege. Consommé Olga, sole à la meunière, saddle of lamb with rosemary and anchovy butter, each plate presented and removed with the choreography of a West End ballet. Conversation was a minefield. Victor spoke too loudly of Ascot and the charms of a certain chorus girl. Lady Eleanor countered with icy inquiries about the state of his allowance. Clara interjected with reminders of appointments Sir Reginald must keep in town. The colonel raised an eyebrow at the mention of a forthcoming board meeting from which he had been conspicuously excluded. Only the dowager aunt, deaf to nuance and fortified by 3 glasses of Sauterne, prattled on about the superiority of pre-war asparagus. Beneath the civility, tension coiled like a spring. At 9:30, Sir Reginald pushed back his chair. The legs scraped across the parquet with a sound like a blade drawn from its scabbard. "If you'll excuse me," he said, his voice gravelled by decades of shouting orders across factory floors, "I have correspondence to attend." He inclined his head, a fractional gesture that served as both apology and dismissal, and strode from the room. The double doors closed behind him with the finality of a coffin lid. The company dispersed. Some adjourned to the billiard room, where the click of ivory balls provided a counterpoint to strained laughter. Others drifted to the music room, where a wireless played the muted strains of Jack Hilton's orchestra. Lady Eleanor excused herself to the conservatory, claiming the need for air. Victor and the colonel repaired to the library with a decanter of Armagnac and the pretence of discussing horses. Clara gathered her papers and vanished upstairs to the secretary's office adjacent to Sir Reginald's study. Dr. Thorne lingered over coffee, his gaze abstracted, until a footman reminded him that the bridge players awaited a 4th. The manor settled into the uneasy hush that follows a storm's first rumble. Upstairs, in the study that occupied the northwest corner of the first floor, Sir Reginald Hawthorne sat at his partner's desk of burled walnut. The room smelled of beeswax, cigar smoke, and the faint metallic tang of ink. A fire crackled in the Adam grate. its flames painting restless shadows across shelves of ledgers and first editions bound in calf. The desk was a fortress of order, blotter aligned with geometric precision, silver inkstand gleaming, a meerschaum pipe resting in a jade tray beside a half-smoked cigar, still trailing a languid ribbon of smoke. Sir Reginald dipped his pen, an antique swan's quill with a gold nib, and began to write. The letter was to his solicitor in Lincoln's Inn, amending the terms of his will. The language was terse, the implications seismic. When he finished, he sanded the page, folded it, and sealed it with red wax impressed by the signet ring on his right hand. Only then did he permit himself a sip of brandy from the crystal balloon at his elbow. Outside, the fog pressed against the mullioned windows like a living thing. Somewhere in its depths, an owl called, the sound mournful and disembodied. Sir Reginald rose, crossed to the window, and drew back the heavy brocade curtain. For a moment, he stood silhouetted against the night, a titan surveying his domain. Then, with a suddenness that startled even himself, he clutched at his chest. Pain lanced through him, white-hot, exquisite, familiar. He had felt its like before, during the heat of boardroom battles and the chill of his wife's betrayals. But this was different. This was a vice tightening around his heart, a serpent uncoiling in his veins. He staggered back to the desk, knocking over the inkstand. Black liquid spread across the blotter like spilled blood. His hand scrabbled for the bell pull, found only air, the room tilted, the firelight smearing into streaks of gold and crimson. He collapsed forward, cheek against the ruined letter, the dagger from the Colonel's collection, removed earlier that evening from the library display and replaced with a near-identical replica, driven with surgical precision between his shoulder blades. The scream came from Mrs. Danvers, the housekeeper, who had entered with a tray of fresh logs. It was a sound to shatter crystal, to curdle milk, to stop the hearts of those who heard it. She dropped the tray, logs scattered across the hearthrug like the bones of some dismembered beast. The scream brought footmen running, guests tumbling from their various pursuits, the entire household converging on the study doorway in a tableau of horror. Lady Eleanor arrived first, her face drained of colour, one hand pressed to her mouth as though to cage another scream. Victor was close behind, reeking of brandy, his eyes wide with something that might have been shock or triumph. Clara Beaumont appeared as if conjured, notebook clutched to her chest like a shield. Dr. Thorne pushed through the press of bodies, his medical bag already open, though even his trained eye could see the futility. Colonel Hale stood at the rear, his military bearing rigid, the knuckles of his right hand white where they gripped the doorframe. Sir Reginald Hawthorne was dead. The dagger protruded from his back at an angle that suggested intimate knowledge of anatomy. Blood, dark and viscous, had already begun to soak into the Persian rug. A tabruz, centuries old, its silken pile now irreparably stained. The overturned inkstand had mingled with the blood, creating a Rorschach blot of accusation. On the desk, the sealed letter lay beneath the victim's outstretched hand, the wax still warm. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks that died against the soot-blackened chimney. Outside, the fog swallowed the moon, and somewhere in the manor's labyrinthine corridors, Hercule Poirot's little grey cells were already beginning to stir, though the great detective himself would not arrive until the following dawn. For now, the stage was set, the players assembled, the first act concluded in a crescendo of violence. The concealed truth lay buried beneath layers of motive, deception, and the impenetrable Sussex mist, but it would not remain concealed for long. Chapter 2. The Arrival of the Detective. The London to Brighton Pullman, the celebrated Southern Belle, eased into Ashford Holt at precisely 23 minutes past 9 due, the morning of the 24th of October, 1934. A thin, reluctant sun had begun to gnaw at the edges of the fog, turning it from pewter to tarnished silver. Yet the platform remained a study in monochrome. Black greatcoats, grey faces, the occasional scarlet flash of a porter's cap. Among the disembarking passengers, one figure stood apart. Not by height, for he was no more than 5 feet 4 inches, nor by ostentation, for his attire was the sober perfection of Bond Street, but by the absolute immobility with which he surveyed the scene. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes planted firmly on the damp boards, adjusted the angle of his Homburg with a gloved finger and allowed the little grey cells their first unimpeded view of the theatre in which he was about to perform. A motor car awaited, a Daimler limousine the colour of ripe damson, its bonnet ornament a silver greyhound poised mid-leap. The chauffeur, rigid in bottle-green livery, touched his cap. "Mr. Poirot, Inspector Japp's compliments, sir. He's at the Manor." Poirot inclined his head. A movement no more than a millimetre, yet sufficient to convey both acknowledgment and the expectation that doors would open without further prompting. They did. The Daimler purred away from the station, tyres hissing on wet gravel, and within minutes the fog closed behind it like a theatre curtain. The drive to Ashford Manor took 12 minutes by Poirot's pocket watch, a slender gold half-hunter whose tick was as regular as a metronome. He spent them in silence, hands folded atop the Malacca cane that served less for support than for punctuation. The countryside unrolled in watercolour washes, hedgerows skeletal with autumn, sheep the texture of dirty cotton wool, the occasional church spire pricking the mist like a needle through silk. At length, the manor itself materialized not dramatically, but with the inevitability of a verdict. 3 stories of mellow sandstone, mullioned windows winking like wary eyes, a portico whose columns had weathered Cromwell and the Kaiser with equal indifference. The Daimler swept beneath it and halted beside a police Austin, whose mudguards still bore the dew of a dawn departure from Scotland Yard. Inspector Japp emerged from the shadow of the porte-cochere, mackintosh unbuttoned despite the chill, Trilby pushed to the back of his head. He was a man built on the lines of a rugby forward, gone slightly to seed, his face a topography of broken capillaries and perpetual exasperation. "Poirot, you old rascal," he greeted, pumping the detective's hand with the enthusiasm of a man greeting a lifebelt. "Thought you'd be tucked up in your flat with a tisane and a crossword. What brings you to this god-forsaken patch of weald?" Poirot permitted himself the ghost of a smile. "Mon cher Japp, it is not I who bring myself, but the affair which summons. A telegram, most urgent, from Sir Reginald Hawthorne's solicitor. A clause, it seems, in the shittier event of untimely demise. I am named arbiter of certain eventualities." He tapped the cane lightly against his palm. "Also, I confess, the little grey cells grow restless without employment. A murder in a country house, with fog, locked doors, and a dagger of exotic provenance. This is the caviar of crime, non?" Japp snorted. "Caviar be damned. It's a right mess. Body's still where he fell. County pathologist's train was delayed at 3 Bridges. Local constables got the wind up properly. Keeps muttering about curses and the Hawthorne's bad blood. Come and see for yourself." They entered through the main door, which stood ajar like the mouth of a mausoleum. The hall was a cavern of oak and silence, its tessellated floor dulled by centuries of beeswax and the recent tread of official boots. A grandfather clock, its face painted with the signs of the zodiac, tolled the quarter with a sound like a coffin lid closing. Portraits glared down, a hawthorn in roughened armour, another in the scarlet of a Napoleonic hussar, a third, Sir Reginald himself, painted 5 years earlier, whose eyes seemed to follow Poirot with the same predatory intensity they had possessed in life. A faint smell lingered. Beeswax, yes, but also something metallic beneath it, the ghost of blood refusing to be exorcised by lavender polish. Jap led the way upstairs, their footsteps muffled by a runner of turkey carpet, the colour of clotted cream. Halfway up, a housemaid in starched cap and apron pressed herself against the banister to let them pass, her eyes wide with the thrilled terror of one who has seen death at close quarters. At the top, a constable stood guard outside the study door, his helmet tucked beneath one arm, his face the shade of suit pudding. He came to attention with a clatter. "All secure, sir," he reported to Jap. No one in or out since Dr. Thorne pronounced life extinct at 23 minutes past 10 last night. Poirot paused on the threshold, surveying the room with the concentration of a conductor, assessing an orchestra before the downbeat. The study was exactly as Mrs. Danvers had left it in her panic. Logs scattered, inkstand overturned, the body slumped forward across the desk like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Sir Reginald's dinner jacket had ridden up at the back, exposing the dagger's hilt, ebony inlaid with mother-of-pearl, the pattern unmistakably Muggle. Blood had soaked through the broadcloth in a widening delta, its edges already browning. The sealed letter lay beneath the victim's right hand, the wax cracked where his weight had fallen upon it. The fire had burned low, a single log glowing like a coal in the grate. Outside the windows, the fog pressed close, turning the glass opaque. Poirot entered with the reverence of a priest approaching an altar. He did not touch the body, protocol must be observed, but circled the desk, his eyes cataloguing every detail. The angle of the yin, dagger, professional, almost surgical. The absence of defensive wounds on the visible hand. The faint smear of ink on the victim's lower lip, where he had, perhaps, licked the pen in that old-fashioned habit of the pre-biro generation. He noted the position of the chair, pushed back no more than 18 inches. Suggesting the attack came from behind, while Sir Reginald was seated. The absence of disturbance on the rug indicated no struggle. Yet the overturned inkstand implied a sudden convulsion. Poison? A heart attack induced by shock? The little grey cells filed the questions away for later. Jap cleared his throat. County surgeon'll be here by noon. Meanwhile, the family and guests are in the drawing room under nominal house arrest. Local man took statements last night. Routine stuff. Alibis that don't hold water. Thought you'd want first crack before the yard's heavy mob descends. Poirot's moustache twitched in what might have been amusement. Nominal house arrest, you say? In England, even murderers are permitted their morning tea. He gestured towards the door. Lead on, mon ami. Let us meet the dramatis personae. They descended to the drawing room, a chamber of faded opulence where chintz sofas sagged beneath the weight of their own respectability. French windows opened onto a terrace swallowed by fog. A pianoforte in the corner stood open, its yellowed keys untouched since some long-ago musicale. The suspects had arranged themselves with the instinctive territoriality of animals in a cage. Lady Eleanor occupied a bergère chair by the fireplace, her black gown a pool of shadow against the flames. She held a cigarette in a jade holder, the smoke curling upwards like incense to an indifferent god. Victor sprawled on a chaise longue, legs stretched out, a tumbler of whisky already in evidence, though the clock had not yet struck 10. Clara Beaumont stood by the window, her back to the room, notebook clutched like a hymnal. Dr. Thorne had taken possession of a leather-wing chair, his medical bag at his feet, spectacles glinting as he cleaned them with a silk handkerchief. Colonel Hale stood at the mantel, one boot on the fender, staring into the fire with the fixity of a man remembering trenches. Japp made the introductions with the brusqueness of a sergeant major. Lady Hawthorne, Mr. Victor Hawthorne, Miss Beaumont, Dr. Thorne, Colonel Hale. This is Monsieur Hercule Poirot, consulting on the case at the request of the deceased solicitor. A ripple passed through the room, subtle but unmistakable. Lady Eleanor's cigarette paused halfway to her lips. Victor's glass halted an inch from his mouth. Clara turned from the window, her face pale as parchment. Dr. Thorne's handkerchief stilled. The Colonel's boot scraped against the fender. Poirot registered each reaction with the precision of a seismograph recording tremors. He bowed, a gesture both courtly and calculated. Mesdames, Monsieur, it is my regret to intrude upon your grief, but murder, alas, is no respecter of mourning. I am here to establish the truth, nothing more. His English was flawless, the accent a delicate overlay of Gallic precision. Inspector Japp permits me to ask certain questions. You will oblige. Lady Eleanor was first to recover. Of course, Monsieur Poirot, though I confess the events of last evening remain somewhat blurred. Her voice was low, cultivated with the faintest trace of huskiness, whisky, or tears held in check. My husband was alive when I left the dining room at 25 minutes past 9. I walked in the conservatory until Mrs. Danvers's scream summoned us. Victor drained his glass and set it down with a click. I was in the billiard room with the Colonel from 9:15 until the hue and cry. Ask him. His tone dared contradiction. Colonel Hale's moustache bristled. Young man was losing steadily at snooker and drowning his sorrows in my Armagnac. I can vouch for his presence, if not his sobriety. Clara spoke without turning. I was in the secretary's office, typing correspondence Sir Reginald dictated before dinner. I heard nothing until the scream. Dr. Thorne replaced his spectacles. I was summoned to the music room at 9:30 to attend Mrs. Pritchard, the dowager aunt, who complained of palpitations. I remained with her until the disturbance. Poirot listened, head cocked like a bird. Most precise, your recollections, yet precision is not always truth. He moved to the centre of the room, cane tapping softly. Let us begin with the dagger. Colonel Hale, you recognize it? The Colonel's jaw tightened. Mughal, 17th century. Part of a pair I brought back from Peshawar in 09. Kept them in the library display case. Noticed one missing yesterday afternoon. Thought one of the maids had moved it for polishing. Yet the case was locked. Always. Key on my watch chain. He produced a brass key, small and ornate. Still there. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And the library? Accessible to all? Guests come and go. Servants too, I suppose. Lady Eleanor stubbed out her cigarette. You imply one of us took it. I imply nothing, madame. I observe. Poirot turned to Clara. Mademoiselle, the letter beneath Sir Reginald's hand, sealed, I think, with his signet. You would know its contents? Clara's fingers tightened on the notebook. Sir Reginald amended his will frequently. I prepared the draft yesterday, but he sealed it himself. I have no knowledge of the final terms." Victor laughed, a sound without humour. "Oh, come off it, Clara. Everyone knows father doted on his little secretary. Probably left you the London house to spite the rest of us." "Victor!" Lady Eleanor's voice cut like a whip. Poirot raised a hand. "Suffice to say, the letter exists. Its contents will be revealed in due course." He addressed Dr. Thorne. The dagger entered between the 5th and 6th ribs, severing the aorta. "Instantaneous?" Thorne hesitated. "The blade is long, 7 inches perhaps. Death would have been swift, but not immediate. Shock, exsanguination, 2 minutes, maybe 3. Yet no cry, no struggle? The study is at the far end of the west wing. The door was closed, the fog muffled sound." Poirot nodded. "And Sir Reginald's heart condition?" "Angina pectoris. I prescribed digitalis. He was resistant to caution." Outside, a church bell tolled 10. The fog began to lift in ragged patches, revealing the formal gardens like a stage set, slowly illuminated. Poirot moved to the French windows, gazing out. "The conservatory, Lady Eleanor. You walked there alone?" "For nearly an hour. The air helped clear my head." "No one saw you?" "The head gardener passed once, trimming the lantana. We exchanged pleasantries." Poirot turned back to the room. "A beginning merely. Inspector Japp will take formal statements. I will examine the study again, the dagger, the letter. We will speak again, individually, intimately. For now, I ask only that you remain within the manor. The truth, mes amis, is a jealous mistress. She reveals herself only to those who pursue her without distraction." He bowed again and, with Japp in tow, left the drawing-room. Behind them, the silence was absolute, broken only by the soft tick of the ormolu clock on the mantel and the distant mournful cry of a peacock from the fog-shrouded lawns. In the corridor, Japp mopped his brow. "Well, what do you make of that little lot?" Poirot's eyes were bright as winter stars. "I make of it, mon cher, a tapestry of lies so intricate that the truth, when it emerges, will be a thing of beauty. But first, the dagger must be photographed, the letter opened in the presence of the solicitor, the alibis tested like gold in the crucible, and the fog is lifting. Soon all will be revealed." They climbed the stairs once more, the little Belgian's cane tapping a measured rhythm against the runner. Somewhere in the manor, a door closed with the soft finality of a secret being locked away. The investigation of Ashford Manor's concealed truth had officially begun. Chapter 3. Whispers of motive. The conservatory smelled of wet earth and dying orchids. Sunlight, thin as watered milk, filtered through the fogged glass roof and lay in pale rectangles across the tessellated floor. Hercule Poirot stood beneath a pergola, heavy with withered wisteria, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on Lady Eleanor Hawthorne, as though she were a specimen beneath a microscope. She had changed into a charcoal day dress, its severity relieved only by a single diamond brooch shaped like a serpent devouring its tail. The serpent's emerald eyes caught the light whenever she moved, flashing green fire. "Madam," Poirot began, his voice soft yet carrying the assured authority of a confessor. "You walked here alone last evening. For nearly 1 hour, you say. Yet the gardener, Mr. Wilkins, recalls seeing you only once, at approximately 20 minutes past 9. After that, the conservatory was empty. Where then did you go?" Lady Eleanor's fingers tightened on the handle of her parasol. "I walked the length of the glass house, monsieur. I paused to admire the cattleyas. Reginald had them imported from Brazil last spring. Then I sat on the marble bench beneath the palm. The fog was thick. Perhaps Wilkins did not see me." "Or perhaps," Poirot murmured, "you left the conservatory by the side door, the one that opens onto the rose garden, and returned the same way. a distance of no more than 30 yards to the study's French windows. The key to those windows, I observe, hangs on a hook just inside the potting shed, a key to which all have access. Her composure flickered, a candle in a draught. You suggest I stabbed my husband through an open window, with half the household within earshot. I suggest only possibilities, madame. Motive, however, is another matter. Poirot produced a folded sheet of heavy cream paper, Sir Reginald's last letter, opened that morning in the presence of the solicitor, Mr. Fortescue of Lincoln's Inn. Your husband wrote this at 9:15. It revokes the codicil, granting you power of attorney over the Hawthorne Trust. In the event of his death, the trust passes to Victor, provided he marries within the year to a woman of whom the trustees approve. Otherwise, it reverts to a charitable foundation. You, madame, receive only the London house and a modest annuity, hardly the settlement a wife of 10 years might expect. Lady Eleanor's laugh was brittle. Reginald changed his will the way other men change their shirts. He threatened divorce a dozen times, always when he was in his cups or in a rage. I paid no attention, yet the letter was sealed and addressed to Mr. Fortescue. It bears yesterday's date. Hardly the act of a man in his cups. Poirot folded the letter with deliberate care. Tell me, madame, about the argument you had with your husband on the terrace 3 nights ago, the one overheard by the scullery maid. Colour rose in her cheeks. A private matter. Murder makes all matters public. Poirot's tone remained gentle, implacable. The maid heard Sir Reginald accuse you of consorting with a man beneath your station. She heard you reply that you would see him in hell before you surrendered your jewels. Was the man Dr. Thorne? Lady Eleanor's parasol snapped shut with a sound like a gunshot. Elias Thorne is a gentleman. He has attended me for neuralgia these 6 months. Reginald was paranoid, saw rivals in every shadow. Paranoia, perhaps, or perception. Poirot inclined his head. We will speak again, madame. He left her among the orchids and retraced his steps to the house. In the billiard room, Victor Hawthorne was chalking a cue with unnecessary violence. The baize was scarred with cigarette burns. Empty glasses clustered on the mantel like soldiers after a rout. Victor's eyes were bloodshot, his tie askew, but his voice held a dangerous clarity. Interrogating my stepmother Poirot, she's a cool one, could gut a man and serve him up with sauce béarnaise. But if you're looking for who hated father most, start with the Colonel. Midland Steel was Hale's life. Father bought it for pennies after the crash, then sacked half the workforce. Hale's been nursing that grudge since 29. Poirot circled the table, his cane tapping a slow rhythm. And you, monsieur? Your father refused to settle your latest debts, £5,000 to a moneylender in Jermyn Street, a sum that would have purchased your freedom from embarrassment. Yet you were here, losing at billiards while your father rewrote his will to exclude your stepmother. Convenient, no? Victor's cue slipped, sending the white ball skittering into a pocket. I was here, yes. Hale will confirm it. And Clara, little Miss Prim, she was in the office next to the study. Typing, she says. Funny how she never heard the dagger go in. Poirot's moustache twitched. You suggest Mademoiselle Beaumont. I suggest everyone had a reason. Father was a bastard, pardon my French, but a rich one. Someone decided to collect early. In the secretary's office, a narrow room smelling of carbon paper and violet ink, Clara Beaumont sat at a typewriter, her fingers poised above the keys as though frozen mid-sentence. Sunlight through the high window turned her hair to burnished copper. She did not look up when Poirot entered. You are here, mademoiselle, from 9:15 until the scream at 10:05. Typing correspondence. Yet the machine's platen is cold, and the paper in it is blank. Clara's hands fell to her lap. I finished the letters earlier. I was reviewing Sir Reginald's appointment diary. Alone? Yes. Poirot opened the diary. The page for 23 October bore a single entry in Clara's neat copperplate. 9:30, VH allowance. Beneath it, in Sir Reginald's heavier hand, tell CB, trust fund activated upon my death. Full details in safe. The ink was fresh. You are the beneficiary of a trust fund, Poirot said quietly. £1 million to be paid upon Sir Reginald's demise. A fortune for a secretary. Clara's eyes filled with tears. He was my father, she whispered. Illegitimate, but acknowledged in private. He promised to provide for me. The trust was his way of doing so without scandal. Poirot's expression did not change. Yet the will leaves you nothing. Only the trust, activated by his death. A powerful motive, mademoiselle. I loved him, she said fiercely. He was cruel, yes, but he was all I had. In the library, Dr. Thorne stood before the empty display case where the Mughal daggers had hung. The remaining blade gleamed wickedly in its velvet nest. Thorne's reflection in the glass was distorted, his face elongated into something almost demonic. The blade is poisoned, he said without turning. Curare, I suspect, refined from a sample I keep for research. Paralyzes the diaphragm within minutes. The stab wound was superfluous. Sir Reginald was dead before the dagger entered his back. Poirot's eyebrows rose. You examined the body. Briefly last night. The pupils were pinpricks, the lips cyanosed, classic signs. Thorne faced Poirot, his eyes steady behind the spectacles. I did not kill him, monsieur, but someone used my research against him. And your relationship with Lady Eleanor? Thorne's jaw tightened. Professional. She suffers migraines. I prescribed laudanum. Yet the scullery maid saw you leaving the conservatory at 9:40 last night, after Lady Eleanor claims to have been alone. Thorne paled. I checked on her. She was distraught. I gave her a sedative. From the vial now missing from your bag? Silence stretched between them like a wire. Colonel Hale was last in the gun-room, cleaning a Purdy shotgun with military precision. Gun oil and beeswax scented the air. He did not look up when Poirot entered. The dagger was mine, he said flatly. Stolen yesterday afternoon. I noticed at tea-time. Thought it a servant's carelessness. You confronted Sir Reginald. Over port. He laughed. Said a man who couldn't keep his own weapons secure deserved to lose them. Then he offered to buy Midland steel for half its worth. I told him I'd see him damned first. Poirot watched the colonel's hands. Steady, lethal. You were in the billiard room with Victor from 9:15. Yet the footman saw you leave at 9:30. You returned at 10. Hale's cloth paused. Needed air. Walked the terrace. The fog was thick. No one saw me. Or you entered the study through the French windows. The key was in the potting shed. Hale snapped the shotgun shut. I've killed men in war, Poirot. Never murdered one in his own house. As Poirot left the gun-room, the grandfather clock in the hall struck noon. 5 suspects, 5 motives, 5 lies. The whispers of Ashford Manor grew louder, and somewhere in their chorus lay the concealed truth, waiting for the little grey cells to distill it into clarity. Chapter 4. The False Trail. The afternoon fog had thinned to a gauzy veil, revealing the manor's west facade like a half-remembered dream. Hercule Poirot stood in the study, alone, the door locked behind him by his own request. Inspector Japp had protested, protocol, chain of evidence. But Poirot's gentle insistence, delivered with the finality of a guillotine, had prevailed. He needed silence, space, and the freedom to think without the clutter of official feet. The room had been photographed, measured, dusted for prints. The county pathologist, Dr. Murchison, had come and gone, confirming Thorne's diagnosis. Curare poisoning, delivered via a minute puncture at the base of the neck, masked by the dagger's theatrical flourish. The stab was post-mortem, a flourish to distract. The sealed letter had been removed to the solicitor's custody. What remained was the residue of violence, the blood-soaked rug, the overturned inkstand, the faint scent of bitter almonds that clung to the air like a lie. Poirot began with the desk. The blotter was a Rorschach of ink and blood, but beneath it lay a single sheet of onion skin, crumpled as though clutched in a dying fist. He smoothed it carefully. A fragment of a ledger page, torn from Sir Reginald's private accounts. Columns of figures, initials, VH, 5,000 CB, Van Deaton 1,000, EH, $50,000, crossed out. At the bottom, in Sir Reginald's hand, debts to be called in upon my death, no exceptions. The paper was dated the day before the murder. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A motive, yes, but for whom? Victor's debts were public knowledge. Clara's trust fund was a secret. Lady Eleanor's annuity had been slashed. The ledger implicated all three. Yet the tear was clean, deliberate. Someone had wanted this fragment found. He moved to the French windows. The catch was stiff, unused to frequent opening. Outside, the gravel path bore the faint imprint of a woman's heel. Narrow, elegant, the size worn by Lady Eleanor. But beside it, deeper and broader, was the mark of a man's brogue. 2 sets of prints leading away into the rose garden. The fog had preserved them like plaster casts. Poirot knelt, his magnifying glass revealing a speck of crimson on a thorn. Blood, still tacky. Not Sir Reginald's, the angle was wrong. Someone had cut themselves in flight. A soft knock interrupted his reverie. Mrs. Danvers, the housekeeper, entered with a silver tray, tea, scones, a single white rose in a bud vase. Her hands trembled as she set it down. "Begging your pardon, sir, but cook found this in the kitchen bin." She produced a small glass vial, its label half scratched away. "Laudanum, 30 minims?" The cork was missing. The contents smelled faintly of anise. "Found when?" Poirot asked. "This morning, sir, after the police left. Cook was burning rubbish and saw it glint." Poirot turned the vial to the light. A smear of lipstick, coral pink, the shade Lady Eleanor favoured. And the bin, was it emptied last night? "After supper, sir, always is." So, the vial had been discarded between 10 o'clock and dawn. He dismissed Mrs. Danvers with thanks and pocketed the evidence. Downstairs, the drawing-room had become a cage. The suspects sat in their appointed places, the air thick with cigarette smoke and suspicion. Japp had returned with 2 constables, their notebooks at the ready. Poirot entered like a maestro taking the podium. "Mes amis," he began, "we pursue a false trail. The dagger, the blood, the dramatic tableau, these are the decorations of a charlatan. The true murder was quieter, more intimate. Curare, administered by a hand that knew anatomy. A prick, a paralysis, a collapse. The dagger was added later to mislead." Victor laughed, a harsh bark. "So we're to believe father was poisoned by a bloody mosquito?" "By a mosquito with access to Dr. Thorne's laboratory," Poirot corrected. "The curare was refined, not crude. And the vial of laudanum, discarded in the kitchen, suggests a second drug perhaps to calm the victim before the fatal dose." Lady Eleanor's cigarette trembled. I lost a vial of laudanum last week. I thought it mislaid." "Convenient," Colonel Hale muttered. Poirot ignored him. "But let us examine the footprints. 2 sets leave the study windows. One is a lady's court shoe, size 5. The other, a gentleman's brogue, size 10. Yet the gravel path circles the house. Where do they go?" He produced a sketch, drawn that morning by the gardener's boy. The prints led to the potting shed, then vanished. Inside the shed, a patch of freshly turned earth. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a blood-stained glove, monogrammed VH, and a second dagger, identical to the murder weapon but clean. Victor surged to his feet. "That's not mine! I've never owned kid gloves!" "Yet the monogram is clear," Japp said, holding the glove aloft. "And the dagger matches the colonel's pair." Hale's face darkened. "Someone's playing us for fools." Poirot's voice cut through the uproar. "Indeed, the glove was planted, the dagger substituted. The true killer wished us to chase shadows, but shadows leave traces." He moved to the fireplace, where the scattered logs still lay from Mrs. Danvers's tray. One log was shorter than the rest, its end charred. Poirot lifted it carefully. Concealed within a hollowed core was a hypodermic syringe, its needle tipped with dried blood. "Curare," he said simply, delivered thus. The log was placed on the fire to destroy evidence, but the flames died before the syringe melted. Clara gasped. "The fire was low when I entered with Mrs. Danvers. I thought Sir Reginald had let it burn out." Poirot turned to Dr. Thorne. "Your laboratory, docteur. The curare, the syringe. Your fingerprints will be upon them." Thorne's face was ashen. "I keep such things locked. The key is on my watch chain, with the dagger case key." "Yet both are missing," Poirot observed. "Stolen, perhaps, by one who knew your habits." The room fell silent. Outside, the fog lifted entirely, revealing the rose garden in stark autumn clarity. The thorns glinted like tiny daggers. Japp cleared his throat. "So we've got planted evidence, a stolen poison, and footprints that lead nowhere. Where does that leave us?" Poirot smiled. A small, dangerous curve of the lip. "It leaves us, mon ami, exactly, where the killer wishes, chasing our own tails. But the little grey cells do not chase. They wait, and the truth, like a cat, comes to them." He replaced the syringe in its oilcloth, his movements precise. "Tonight, we set a trap. The killer believes us distracted by false trails. Let us oblige, then strike when the mask slips." As the sun dipped behind the copper beeches, casting long shadows across the lawn, Poirot stood at the study window and watched the suspects disperse. Lady Eleanor to the conservatory, her parasol a black exclamation mark. Victor to the billiard room, his footsteps heavy with rage. Clara to the library, her notebook clutched like a shield. Thorne to his room, his medical bag swinging. Hale to the gunroom, his stride military. Chapter 5. Echoes from the Past. The library of Ashford Manor smelled of old leather, candle smoke, and secrets. Night had fallen hard. The fog, banished by afternoon wind, had returned in force, pressing against the tall windows like a living shroud. A single lamp burned on the central table, its green shade throwing a pool of light over scattered documents and the solemn faces of Hercule Poirot and Inspector Japp. Between them lay the contents of Sir Reginald Hawthorne's private safe, opened that evening by Mr. Fortescue, with a key found taped beneath the desk drawer. The solicitor had departed for London, his briefcase heavy with the revised will, his expression grim. Poirot lifted a photograph first, sepia, edges curled, dated 1908. A younger Sir Reginald stood beside a woman in nurse's uniform, her face obscured by a wide brim. On the reverse, in faded ink, RH&MB, Sheffield Royal Infirmary. Poirot set it aside and drew out a birth certificate. Clara Mary Beaumont, born 12th of March 1908. Mother, Mary Beaumont. Father, unnamed. A second document, a private deed of acknowledgement signed by Sir Reginald in 1927, declared Clara his natural daughter and established the trust fund of £1 million, payable upon his death or her 27th birthday, whichever came first. Japp whistled low. So the secretary's the bastard heiress. That's a motive to make a saint sin. Or a daughter grieve, Poirot corrected. He turned to a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. Love letters, written in Sir Reginald's youthful hand to Mary Beaumont. The tone shifted over time, ardent, then pleading, finally cold. The last, dated 1918. You will never speak of the child again. I have provided, do not test me. Clara's mother died in the influenza pandemic, Poirot murmured. Sir Reginald took the child, placed her with a distant cousin, paid for her education. She entered his employ at 18, loyal, discreet, grateful. Yet the will leaves her nothing beyond the trust. Why? Japp tapped a ledger. Because he was cutting everyone out. Look here. Debts called in, investments liquidated, the London house mortgaged to the hilt. He was planning to flee to South America. Steamship tickets for Buenos Aires, booked under the name Mr. R. Harding. One berth only. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A man who trusts no one, not even his blood. But someone discovered his plan. He opened a small Morocco case. Inside lay a locket, gold, heart-shaped, the front engraved with a tiny C. The photograph within showed a woman in her 20s, dark-haired, smiling. The resemblance to Clara was unmistakable. On the back, to my darling girl, on her 21st, Papa. The locket had been pried open recently. The hinge was scratched. Clara wore this yesterday, Japp said. I noticed it when she was typing. She kept touching it like a talisman. Poirot closed the case. A father's gift, hidden for years. Why reveal it now? They moved to the desk where Clara's appointment diary lay open. The entry for 23rd of October was annotated in the margin. Tell C.B. her truth at last. Below, in Sir Reginald's hand, she deserves to know the ink was the same as the ledger fragment found in the study. Japp scratched his chin. So he was going to tell her she was his daughter, publicly. That would have blown the roof off. Lady Eleanor would have been humiliated, Victor disinherited in all but name. Yet the truth died with him, Poirot said. Or did it? He produced the torn ledger page from the study. Under magnification, a faint watermark appeared, the crest of the Hawthorne Trust. The tear was not random. It followed the perforation where a stub had been removed. Poirot aligned it with the ledger from the safe. The missing stub recorded a payment of $10,000 to E.T., Dr. Elias Thorne, dated 3 days before the murder. The memo, for services rendered re-RH heart condition. Blackmail? Japp asked. Or hush money? Poirot replied. Sir Reginald's angina was worsening. Thorne supplied digitalis and perhaps something stronger. But $10,000 is a fortune for pills. A soft knock. Clara entered, her face pale as moonlight. She carried a small wooden box. I found this in Sir Reginald's dressing room. It was locked. The key was in his waistcoat pocket. Inside, a bundle of photographs, more explicit than the first. Sir Reginald with a woman, not Mary Beaumont, but younger, blonde. On the back, E&R, Paris, 1925. Lady Eleanor, before her marriage, in a state of undress that left little to imagination. A second bundle, letters from Thorne to Lady Eleanor, passionate, incriminating. The last, dated a month ago. He knows, we must act. Clara's voice trembled. He was going to expose them, divorce her, ruin Thorne's career. The trust fund was his leverage over me. Silence, in exchange for security. Poirot's gaze was gentle. "And you, mademoiselle? Did you know of this?" "I suspected. He grew cruel in his illness, taunted her, threatened to send the photographs to the newspapers. I begged him to stop. He laughed. Said the past must be paid for." Japp flipped through the letters. So, Lady Eleanor and Thorne had motive aplenty. But the curare came from Thorne's lab, Poirot finished, and the syringe from the log. But the footprints, 2 sets, a conspiracy. They were interrupted by a shout from the corridor. Colonel Hale burst in, his face flushed. "The gunroom's been ransacked. My service revolver, gone." Poirot and Japp followed him downstairs. The gunroom was chaos. Cabinets forced, ammunition scattered. The Purday shotgun lay on the floor, its barrels bent. On the wall, a single bullet had been fired into the portrait of Sir Reginald, obliterating the painted face. "Someone's sending a message," Hale growled. Poirot examined the bullet hole. The angle suggested the shooter stood on the library ladder, accessible from the corridor. A scrap of paper was pinned beneath the frame by the bullet. Debts paid in blood. Japp bagged the note. Same handwriting as the ledger stub. Someone's tying up loose ends. Poirot's eyes swept the room. A faint smell of gunpowder lingered, but beneath it, violets, Clara's perfume. He moved to the window. The latch was broken. The rose garden beyond showed fresh footprints leading to the potting shed. Inside the shed, the earth patch had been disturbed again. Beneath it, the missing revolver, wrapped in a blood-stained handkerchief, monogrammed V.H. Victor's again. Japp cursed. "Another plant! They're laughing at us!" Poirot knelt, his magnifying glass revealing a single white rose petal caught in the revolver's trigger guard. "No, mon ami, they are panicking. The rose, Lady Eleanor's favourite, the handkerchief, Victor's, the revolver, Hale's. Someone wishes us to see conspiracy where there is only desperation." He stood, brushing soil from his knees. The echoes from the past are loud tonight. A daughter's legitimacy, a wife's shame, a doctor's greed, a rival's ruin, a son's debts. All converge on one man's death. But the killer mistakes noise for substance. The truth is quieter. Outside, the fog swirled thicker than ever, swallowing the manor whole. Somewhere in its depths, a clock struck midnight. Poirot listened to the chimes, each one a heartbeat in the dark. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we reconstruct the crime. Every step, every breath. The past will speak, and the present will answer." Clara lingered in the doorway, the wooden box clutched to her chest. "He was going to tell me everything," she whispered, "at dinner. He said it was time I knew who I was." Poirot's hand rested briefly on her shoulder. "And now, mademoiselle, you do." The library lamp flickered, casting long shadows across the photographs, the letters, the birth certificate. The echoes from the past were no longer whispers. They were screams, demanding justice in a house built on secrets. Chapter 6. The Midnight Revelation. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 11 with the solemnity of a judge's gavel. Ashford Manor slept uneasily. Servants huddled in the kitchen. Constables posted at every external door. The fog outside so dense it seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Hercule Poirot had dismissed the household with a single raised hand, promising revelation at midnight. Now, in the drawing-room lit only by a dying fire and a chandelier dimmed to a conspiratorial glow, the 5 suspects waited like pieces on a chessboard, awaiting the master's move. Poirot stood before the mantel, his small figure casting a disproportionately large shadow. Inspector Japp flanked him, notebook closed, revolver holstered but unbuttoned. On the table lay the evidence arrayed like a macabre still life. The curare syringe, the blood-stained glove, the white rose petal, the torn ledger page, the locket, the revolver wrapped in Victor's handkerchief. The air was thick with beeswax, cordite, and fear. Mesdames, messieurs, Poirot began, his voice a scalpel. We have pursued shadows long enough. Tonight, the truth steps into the light. But first, a demonstration. He produced a silver pocket watch, opened it, and laid it beside the syringe. Curare acts within 90 seconds. Paralysis is total. Death follows in 3 minutes. Sir Reginald was seated, writing, when the poison entered his bloodstream. He had time for one convulsion, enough to overturn the inkstand, but not to cry out. The dagger was added later to create the illusion of frenzy. Lady Eleanor's cigarette trembled. "We know this, monsieur. Get to the point. The point, madame, is timing." Poirot turned to Victor. "You claim to have been in the billiard room from 9:15. Yet the footman saw you leave at 9:28, returning at 10:02. 34 minutes unaccounted for." Victor's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the parquet. "I needed air. Walked the terrace. Alone, yes." Poirot's gaze shifted to Colonel Hale. "And you, mon colonel, left at 9:30, returned at 10. You claim the same. Yet the terrace is visible from the conservatory windows. Lady Eleanor says she saw no one." Hale's moustache bristled. "Fog was thick as pea soup." "Thick enough to hide 2 men meeting?" Poirot produced a second handkerchief, silk, monogrammed M.H., found that afternoon in the rose garden, snagged on a thorn. "Your initials, Colonel. Blood on the corner. Your blood type. O positive. Sir Reginald was AB negative." Hale's hand went to a fresh cut on his thumb. "Thorn prick. Nothing more." "Or a struggle," Poirot said softly. "With Victor, perhaps, over the revolver." Victor surged to his feet. "This is absurd! You've planted everything. The glove, the handkerchief, the petal." "Non." Poirot's voice cracked like a whip. "I have planted nothing, but someone has. Someone who wished us to see conspiracy where there is only panic." He moved to Clara. "Mademoiselle, the locket, you wore it yesterday. Sir Reginald gave it to you on your 21st birthday, yet you kept it hidden. Why?" Clara's fingers touched her throat where the locket had hung. "He asked me to. Said it would cause talk. But yesterday he told me to wear it openly. Said after dinner he would announce everything." "Everything," Poirot echoed. "Your parentage, the trust fund, the photographs of Lady Eleanor and Dr. Thorne, the sale of Midland Steel. He intended to burn every bridge in one grand conflagration." Dr. Thorne's spectacles flashed. "He was mad with pain. The digitalis had affected his mind. Or clarified it," Poirot countered. "He knew his days were numbered. He wished to die clean, or take everyone with him." He turned to the fireplace. The logs Mrs. Danvers had scattered still lay where they fell. Poirot lifted the hollowed log, revealing the syringe. This was meant to burn, but the fire was low, deliberately banked. Someone wanted us to find it. Japp stepped forward. "We've got footprints, blood, weapons, motives, and lies," Poirot finished. "Let us test them." He produced a stoppered vial, clear liquid, labelled digitalis solution. "Dr. Thorne's prescription for Sir Reginald, but the dosage is wrong. Double strength, enough to stop a horse's heart." Thorne paled. "I wrote the prescription myself. Standard dose. Yet the bottle in Sir Reginald's dressing room is half empty. He took it at 8:30 with his coffee. By 9, he would have been drowsy, compliant, easy to approach with a syringe." Lady Eleanor's voice was a whisper. "You're saying Elias poisoned him first, then stabbed him?" I am saying the curare was the coup de grace. The digitalis was the opening move. Poirot moved to the French windows. The footprints, 2 sets. 1 lady's, 1 gentleman's. They meet at the potting shed, where the earth was disturbed twice. First to hide the syringe, second to plant the revolver. But the rose petal, Lady Eleanor's, fell from a bouquet she carried yesterday. She dropped it in the study at 9:40, when she confronted Sir Reginald about the photographs. Lady Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. I went to beg him to destroy them. He laughed, said he'd post them to the Daily Mail. I left in tears. At 9:45, Poirot continued, Victor entered through the terrace door. He had the revolver, stolen from the Colonel's cabinet. He demanded his debts be paid. Sir Reginald refused. They struggled. The gun went off, into the library portrait. Victor fled, dropping the handkerchief. Victor's face was grey. I didn't kill him. He was alive when I left, clutching his chest. Digitalis, Poirot said, the first dose. At 9:50, Dr. Thorne entered, ostensibly to check on his patient. He administered the curare, knowing the dagger would follow. Thorne's voice was steady. Why would I incriminate myself with my own poison? Because you believed the syringe would burn, and because Lady Eleanor promised you half the trust fund if Clara was discredited. Silence fell, broken only by the clock's tick. Poirot turned to Clara. And you, mademoiselle? You entered at 10, saw your father dying, heard footsteps in the corridor. You took the dagger from the library, knowing it would implicate the Colonel, and staged the stabbing to protect whom? Clara's eyes filled with tears. Victor, he's my half-brother. I thought if the police focused on the Colonel, they would ignore the family, Poirot finished. But the petal, the handkerchief, the revolver, all pointed inward. You overreached. He faced the room. The murder was a conspiracy of desperation. Lady Eleanor and Thorne planned the poisoning. Victor's confrontation provided the distraction. Clara's staging completed the chaos. But the little grey cells see order in disorder. Japp stepped forward, handcuffs ready. Lady Eleanor Hawthorne, Dr. Elias Thorne, Victor Hawthorne, Clara Beaumont, you are under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Hawthorne. As the constables moved, a scream echoed from the corridor. Mrs. Danvers burst in, her apron soaked with blood. The Colonel! He's in the gun room! Shot! They ran. Hale lay slumped over the desk, the service revolver beside his hand, a bullet wound in his temple, a note in his precise military hand. I cannot live with the ruin of my name. RH won in the end. Poirot knelt, checked the pulse, shook his head. Suicide, the final echo. But as Japp sealed the room, Poirot noticed the revolver's cylinder. 1 bullet fired, 5 remaining. The wound was contact, the angle perfect. Yet the gun oil smelled fresh, and on the Colonel's right hand, no powder burns. Chapter 7. Twists of Deception. The gun room reeked of fresh blood and old gun oil. Colonel Marcus Hale lay across the baize-top table, the service revolver still warm in his slack right hand. The bullet had entered just above the left ear, exiting in a crimson fan across the wall map of the northwest frontier. Powder burns ringed the wound. The angle was textbook suicide. Yet Hercule Poirot, kneeling beside the body, felt the little grey cells revolt. Something was wrong, terribly, subtly wrong. Inspector Japp stood in the doorway, his face the colour of putty. Another one. First the old man, now Hale. This house is cursed. Non, mon ami, Poirot murmured, rising. It is calculated. He lifted Hale's right hand. The fingers were rigid in early rigour, but the palm was clean. No trace of the nitrate residue that should blacken a suicide's skin. Observe, the Colonel was left-handed. He signed the dinner menu with his left, loaded his shotgun with his left, yet the revolver is in his right hand, and the wound is on the left temple. Impossible! Japp's eyes widened. Murder, then. Staged as suicide. Precisely. Poirot turned to the room. The window was latched. The door had been locked from the inside, the key still in the lock. A single brass cartridge case lay on the rug, ejected by the Webley's brake action. Poirot picked it up with a silk handkerchief. Fired within the hour, but listen. He tapped the revolver's cylinder. A dull clunk. 1 round fired, 5 remaining, yet the colonel kept his ammunition in a locked drawer. He indicated the drawer. Forced open, the lock splintered. Someone entered with a duplicate key, shot him, arranged the scene, locked the door from within, and he moved to the fireplace. The flue was narrow, but a thin chain dangled from the chimney. At its end, tied with fishing line, was the duplicate key, blackened by soot. Exited up the chimney, like Father Christmas in reverse. Japp whistled. The killer's a contortionist. Or had an accomplice small enough to fit. Poirot's gaze flicked to the ventilation grate near the ceiling. Screws loosened, fingerprints smudged with soot. A child, perhaps, or a slight woman. They returned to the drawing room, where the arrested quartet waited under guard. Lady Eleanor's composure had cracked. Mascara streaked her cheeks. Victor paced like a caged wolf. Clara sat motionless, the locket now open on her lap, her mother's photograph staring sightlessly. Dr. Thorne cleaned his spectacles with mechanical precision. Poirot addressed them. The colonel did not take his own life. He was murdered to silence him. Someone feared what he knew. Victor laughed bitterly. He knew plenty. Father ruined him. He had every reason to gut the old bastard. Yet he did not, Poirot said. The colonel was in the billiard room with you until 10. The gunshot in the library portrait was at 9:50. He had no time to stage the study, poison Sir Reginald, and return. His alibi is ironclad. He produced the soot-blackened key. This unlocks the gunroom from within. It was dropped down the chimney after the murder. The grate shows prints. Small, a woman's size 5. Lady Eleanor. Her head snapped up. I was in my room. Ask the maid. The maid was dismissed at 11. You were seen by the kitchen window at 11:15 carrying a bundle. A dressing gown, she snapped. I couldn't sleep. Poirot turned to Clara. And you, mademoiselle? You know the chimneys. As a child, you played in them. Sir Reginald boasted of it. You are slight enough to climb. Clara's voice was steady. I was in the library reading Father's letters. I heard the shot, ran to the gunroom, found the colonel. He was already dead. Yet your shoes, Poirot indicated her patent pumps, have soot on the soles. And this. He held up a single white rose thorn, caught in the hem of her skirt. From the conservatory. You went to the gunroom via the roof, entered through the chimney, shot the colonel, staged the suicide, and returned the same way. Clara's facade crumbled. He was going to confess. He came to me at 11. Said he'd seen Victor leave the study at 9:50, alive. He wanted to trade his silence for a share of the trust. I refused. He grabbed me. Here. She touched her wrist, where bruises bloomed. I took the revolver from his belt. It went off. I panicked. I arranged it to look like suicide. Victor lunged. You little bitch! Japp restrained him. Poirot raised a hand. But the colonel was not the only one silenced. The curare, the digitalis, the dagger, all point to a larger design. He moved to Dr. Thorne. You supplied the poison, yes, but not to kill, to control. Sir Reginald's heart was failing. You increased the digitalis to induce dependence, then threatened to withhold it unless he signed over Midland Steel shares. Lady Eleanor was your accomplice. Her affair gave you leverage. Thorne's spectacles slipped. Preposterous. Is it? Poirot produced a telegram, delivered that morning. Shares transferred to E.T. per agreement. R.H. Sent yesterday at noon. Sir Reginald signed under duress, but he had a change of heart. The revised will cut you both out. Lady Eleanor's voice was venom. He was a monster. He deserved to die. Yet you did not kill him, Poirot said. You poisoned the ink. Sir Reginald licked his pen, a habit you knew. The curare was in the ink, absorbed through the mucous membranes, slow, painless. He collapsed at 10. The dagger was Clara's addition to protect Victor. He turned to Victor. You entered at 9:50, demanded money, fired the shot into the portrait. You left Sir Reginald alive, but doomed. Clara found him dying, stabbed him to implicate the Colonel, hid the syringe in the log. Thorne and Lady Eleanor planned to frame Clara for everything. The room spun with accusations. Japp's constables moved to separate them. Poirot's voice cut through the chaos. But the Colonel's murder unravels it all. Clara acted alone to protect her brother. The rest of you, your conspiracy collapsed under its own weight. Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing the first pale stars. Poirot stood at the window, watching dawn creep over the rose garden. The thorns glittered with dew, each one a tiny dagger. Japp approached, handcuffs clinking. So Clara killed the Colonel, but the original murder was a chain, Poirot finished. Thorne and Lady Eleanor poisoned the ink. Victor's confrontation hastened the crisis. Clara's staging completed the deception. 4 hands, 1 death. He turned back to the room. The twists of deception are many, but the truth is singular, and it is this. Sir Reginald Hawthorne was murdered by his own family, piece by piece, until the final blade fell. The clock struck 1. The manor was silent, save for the soft sobs of a daughter who had lost everything to save what little she had. Chapter 8. The Gathering Storm. The dining hall of Ashford Manor had never looked more like a tribunal. Midnight had passed, and the great chandelier, its crystal dulled by decades of candle smoke, now blazed with electric light that turned every face into a mask of accusation. The long mahogany table, once the stage for banquets and toasts, was bare, save for the evidence, the curare syringe in its glass vial, the ink-stained blotter, the white rose petal pressed between microscope slides. The locket, the torn ledger, the soot-blackened chimney key, and the Webley revolver wrapped in Victor's bloodied handkerchief. At the head, where Sir Reginald had presided, Hercule Poirot stood like a diminutive judge. His patent leather shoes planted firmly on the Persian rug still faintly stained from the study. Outside, the storm arrived without warning. Thunder rolled across the Weald like artillery. Rain lashed the tall windows in diagonal sheets, turning the glass into a waterfall of silver. Lightning strobed, freezing the suspects in tableau of guilt. Lady Eleanor, rigid in black velvet, her diamond serpent brooch flashing green fire. Victor dishevelled, tie askew, knuckles white on the table's edge. Clara, pale as parchment, the locket now closed around her neck like a noose. Dr. Thorne, spectacles reflecting the chandelier's glare, his medical bag at his feet like a silent witness. Inspector Japp stood behind Poirot, flanked by 2 constables. The air crackled with more than electricity. Mesdames, Messieurs, Poirot began, his voice cutting through the storm's growl. We have danced long enough. The false trails, the footprints, the planted glove, the suicide that was not, these were smoke. Tonight, The wind blows the smoke away. He lifted the ink blotter. Sir Reginald died at 10:03, according to the stopped pocket watch found beneath his body. The curare in the ink was absorbed slowly, 30 minutes from first lick of the pen. He wrote the revised will at 9:20, sealed it at 9:30. By 9:40, the poison was in his bloodstream. He had time for one act, pressing the bell pull. The wire was cut, deliberately. Lady Eleanor's cigarette fell from her fingers, scorching the tablecloth. "I was in the conservatory at 9:40, Poirot interrupted, "but you entered the study at 9:35 through the French windows. The gardener saw you leave the conservatory at 9:28, return at 9:50. You brought the ink pot, refilled with curare-laced solution. You knew his habit. You watched him write, lick, write again, then you left." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Poirot turned to Dr. Thorne. "You supplied the curare, yes, but not for murder, for leverage. Sir Reginald's heart was failing. You controlled the digitalis. You threatened to withhold it unless he transferred Midland steel. He agreed, then reneged. The Whodunit telegram was a forgery, sent by you to implicate yourself falsely, to deflect suspicion." Thorne's spectacles slipped down his nose. "You have no proof. I have the bottle." Poirot produced a small brown vial from his waistcoat. "Digitalis, double strength, found in your medical bag, hidden in a false bottom. Your fingerprints. Sir Reginald took it at 8:30. By 9, he was drowsy. You entered at 9:50, checked his pulse, administered a second dose. Lethal. The curare was insurance." Victor slammed the table. "Liar! I saw father at 9:50. He was alive, clutching his chest. I demanded my debts. He laughed, said I'd get nothing. I fired the shot into the portrait to scare him. He was breathing when I left." Poirot's gaze was steady. Breathing, yes, but dying. The digitalis stopped his heart at 10:01. The curare in the ink was Lady Eleanor's slower poison, meant to kill by morning, blamed on natural causes. Your confrontation hastened it. He turned to Clara. "And you, mademoiselle, entered at 10:02. You found him dead, the ink pot overturned, the letter sealed. You took the dagger from the library, knowing it would implicate the colonel, and stabbed the corpse to create chaos. You hid the syringe in the log, planted the glove, the handkerchief, the revolver. You murdered the colonel at 11:15 to silence his witness of Victor's visit." Clara's voice was a whisper. "He was going to ruin us all. The trust, the photographs, the shares. Father wanted to burn the world. I only wanted to protect what was left." Lightning flashed, illuminating the storm-lashed gardens. Poirot lifted the chimney key. "The colonel's murder was your masterpiece. You climbed the flue. Child's play for one who knew the chimneys. You shot him with his own revolver, arranged the suicide, dropped the key. But you left soot on your shoes, a thorn in your hem, and this." He held up a single white hair, Clara's, caught in the revolver's trigger guard. Japp stepped forward, handcuffs ready. "Clara Beaumont, you are under arrest for the murder of Colonel Marcus Hale, Lady Eleanor Hawthorne, Dr. Elias Thorne, Victor Hawthorne, conspiracy to murder Sir Reginald Hawthorne." The storm reached its crescendo. Thunder crashed directly overhead. The chandelier swayed, crystals chiming like funeral bells. Lady Eleanor lunged for the French windows, but a constable blocked her. Victor roared, overturning his chair. Thorne stood motionless, defeated. Clara wept silently, the locket glinting at her throat. Poirot raised a hand. "One last truth. The concealed truth is not one killer, but 4. Lady Eleanor poisoned the ink. Thorne administered the fatal digitalis. Victor's shot provided distraction." Clara staged the scene and silenced the witness. Each believed they acted alone. Together they created the perfect crime. He moved to the windows, rain drumming like gunfire. But perfection is a lie. The little grey cells see the cracks. Japp's voice was grim. The county van's outside. Storm or no storm, they're leaving in irons. As the constables moved, lightning struck the copper beech in the garden. The tree exploded in a shower of sparks, illuminating the manor in stark white. For a moment, every face was visible: guilt, despair, defiance. Then darkness returned, deeper than before. Poirot turned from the window. The storm passes. So does deception. Justice remains. The dining hall doors closed behind the prisoners. The storm raged on, but inside, the gathering storm of Ashford Manor had broken at last. Chapter 9. Unmasking the Culprit. The storm had spent itself by 4 in the morning, leaving Ashford Manor drenched and shivering under a sky scrubbed clean to the colour of tarnished pewter. The dining hall, once a tribunal, was now a confessional. The chandelier had been extinguished. Only the green-shaded banker's lamp on the sideboard cast a pool of light over the mahogany table, where the evidence lay in neat, damning rows. Hercule Poirot stood at the foot, his small figure immaculate despite the hour, moustache waxed, spats gleaming, the malacca cane resting against his calf like a silent sentinel. Inspector Japp leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, his face carved deep with fatigue and the grim satisfaction of a case nearly closed. The 4 prisoners had been separated, then reassembled at Poirot's insistence. Lady Eleanor sat to the left, wrists in steel cuffs that looked obscene against her black velvet. Victor opposite, shirt unbuttoned at the throat, eyes bloodshot. Clara beside him, the locket now confiscated and sealed in an evidence bag. Dr. Thorne at the far end, spectacles removed, his naked eyes small and blinking. 2 constables stood behind them, rain still dripping from their capes. Poirot spoke without preamble. "The hour is late, mes amis, but the truth is impatient. We have danced through red herrings, the footprints, the planted glove, the staged suicide, the chimney key, all distractions. The concealed truth is simpler, crueler, and alas, utterly human." He lifted the ink blotter, now dried to a brittle crust of black and crimson. Sir Reginald died of curare poisoning, absorbed through the mucous membrane of the lip. The poison was in the ink. He licked his pen 3 times between 9:30 and 9:50. Death was certain by 10:03. The dagger, the digitalis overdose, the gunshot in the portrait, these were ornaments on a corpse. Lady Eleanor's voice was a cracked whisper. "I refilled the ink pot. I knew the curare was there. Elias gave it to me, said it would stop his heart painlessly. I wanted him gone. The humiliation, the photographs, the will. He left me nothing but debts." Poirot's gaze was gentle, merciless. "You acted alone in the poisoning, madame, but not in the planning. Dr. Thorne supplied the curare, believing it would be used to subdue Sir Reginald for the share transfer. He did not know you intended murder." Thorne's head snapped up. "She lied to me, said it was for sleep, for his nightmares. I measured the dose myself, sublethal." "Yet you entered the study at 9:50, Poirot continued. "You checked his pulse, found it racing from the digitalis you had already administered in his coffee. You saw the ink pot, realized what she had done. You said nothing. You left him to die." Thorne's hands trembled. "I panicked. If I raised the alarm, the curare would be traced to me." Poirot turned to Victor. "And you, monsieur, burst in at 9:52. You demanded your £5,000. Sir Reginald, already poisoned, laughed in your face. You fired the Webley into the library portrait to frighten him. The noise masked his collapse. You fled, believing you had only frightened a dying man. Victor's laugh was hollow. I thought the heart attack was natural, I swear it. Natural, perhaps, but accelerated. Poirot lifted the torn ledger page. This fragment was torn deliberately by Clara. She entered at 10:02, found her father dead, the inkpot overturned, the letter sealed. She recognized the handwriting on the ledger stub. Her trust fund. She feared exposure. She took the Muggle dagger from the library, stabbed the corpse to implicate Colonel Hale, and hid the syringe in the hollow log. Clara's voice was steady now, stripped of tears. I wanted to protect Victor. If the Colonel was blamed, the family would be safe. I planted the glove, the handkerchief, the revolver. I killed the Colonel when he threatened to confess. Poirot nodded. You climbed the chimney at 11:15, shot him with his own gun, arranged the suicide. But you overlooked the white hair on the trigger, yours, and the soot on your shoes. He stepped back, surveying them. 4 actors, 1 script. Lady Eleanor poisoned the ink. Dr. Thorne supplied the curare and the digitalis. Victor provided the distraction. Clara staged the chaos and silenced the witness. Each believed they acted alone. Together they created a perfect storm of deception. Japp moved forward with the handcuffs. Lady Eleanor Hawthorne, Dr. Elias Thorne, Victor Hawthorne, Clara Beaumont, you are charged with the murder of Sir Reginald Hawthorne, and in Miss Beaumont's case, the murder of Colonel Marcus Hale. As the constables led them away, Poirot lifted the locket from the evidence table. He opened it, revealing the photograph of Mary Beaumont, Clara's mother. Your father loved her, mademoiselle. In his way, he built the trust to protect you. In the end, you protected him by destroying yourself. Clara paused at the door, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her cheeks. He was going to tell the world I was his daughter. I wanted that more than the money. But I couldn't let him ruin us all. The door closed. The dining hall was silent save for the tick of the ormolu clock and the soft drip of rain from the eaves. Japp lit a cigarette, the match flaring briefly. Neatly tied, Poirot. But the Colonel, why kill him? Because he saw Victor leave the study at 9:55. He was prepared to trade that knowledge for a share of Midland Steel. Clara could not allow it. The concealed truth is this. Love and greed, twisted together, are more lethal than any poison. Poirot replaced the locket in its bag. The storm is over, mon ami. Dawn comes. Outside, the first pale light touched the rose garden. The thorns, washed clean, glittered like tiny daggers in the morning sun. Chapter 10. The Resolution's Dawn. Dawn arrived at Ashford Manor with the tentative grace of a penitent. The storm had scoured the sky to a porcelain blue. The fog, that old conspirator, had retreated to the hollows of the Weald, leaving the gardens washed clean and trembling. Dew hung from every thorn of the rose arbour, like tears the night had forgotten to shed. The copper beech, split by lightning, smouldered gently, its heartwood exposed like a wound finely cauterized. Hercule Poirot stood on the terrace, coat collar turned up against the chill, his breath a small white cloud in the crystalline air. Behind him, the manor's windows glinted, some shuttered, some staring blankly, all silent. The county police van had departed an hour earlier, its black bulk swallowing Lady Eleanor, Dr. Thorne, Victor and Clara into the grey anonymity of justice. Their footsteps on the gravel had sounded like the closing of a book. Inspector Japp followed in the Daimler, his notebook heavy with confessions, his face etched with the weariness of a man who had seen too much of human frailty in one night. Only the servants remained. moving through the corridors like ghosts in a play whose final act had ended. Poirot descended the steps into the rose garden. The gravel crunched softly beneath his patent leather shoes. He paused at the spot where the footprints had begun. Lady Eleanor's narrow heel, the broader brogue that had never existed. The rain had erased them, but the little grey cells required no physical trace. The pattern was etched in logic. He bent, plucked a single white rose still clinging to its stem, and tucked it into his buttonhole. A small gesture, almost frivolous, yet it felt like punctuation. Mrs. Danvers emerged from the conservatory, apron crisp, eyes red-rimmed but steady. "Breakfast is laid in the morning room, sir. Coffee, Kipper's toast. The staff thought, well, you might want something before you leave." Poirot inclined his head. "You are kind, madame, but first, a word." They walked the length of the glass house, past the cattleyas Sir Reginald had imported from Brazil, their petals furled like secrets. "The house will pass to the trust," Poirot said. "Clara's trust, ironically. The courts will decide its disposition. You and the staff will be grim, provided for. Sir Reginald was not entirely without conscience." Mrs. Danvers nodded. "Miss Clara asked me to give you this." She produced a small envelope, sealed with green wax. Inside, a single sheet of Clara's violet notepaper. C.B. Poirot folded the note carefully and slipped it into his waistcoat. "She will be tried for the Colonel's murder. The others for conspiracy. Justice is not gentle, but it is just." They returned to the terrace as the sun cleared the beaches, gilding the manor's sandstone facade. A motor car crunched up the drive, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, its chrome gleaming. Mr. Fortescue, the solicitor, alighted, briefcase in hand, his London suit incongruous among the dew-soaked roses. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted, doffing his bowler. "The will is probated. The trust fund, intact despite everything, passes to Miss Beaumont's estate. The London house to Lady Eleanor's creditors. Midland Steel reverts to Colonel Hale's heirs. A clean sweep." Poirot's moustache twitched. "And the letter? The one beneath Sir Reginald's hand?" Fortescue produced a second envelope, the wax cracked but intact. "Addressed to you, sir. He wrote it the afternoon before his death. Said if anything happened, you were to have it unopened by any other." Poirot took it, turned it over, his name in Sir Reginald's angular script. He slit the seal with a thumbnail. "Poirot, if you read this, I am dead by treachery. Trust no one in this house, not my wife, not my son, not the girl who calls herself secretary. They circle like jackals. The photographs are in the safe behind the Reynolds portrait in the library. Use them as you see fit. The trust is Clara's birthright. Guard it. I was a hard man, but not without regret." R.H. Poirot folded the letter, his expression unreadable. "He knew," he said softly. "He staged his own endgame, even in death." Fortescue cleared his throat. "The Reynolds portrait was removed this morning. The safe behind it, empty. The photographs are gone." Poirot smiled, the first genuine smile of the morning. "Clara," he murmured, "she took them. One last act of love or vengeance." The solicitor departed, the rolls purring away down the drive. Poirot remained on the terrace, the white rose in his lapel catching the light. A peacock strutted across the lawn, its tail a fan of impossible blues and greens, and for a moment the garden seemed almost peaceful. Japs Austin returned at 9, the inspector climbing out with a thermos of tea and a paper bag of bacon sandwiches. "Thought you'd still be here, poking at clues. County's sending a man to board the place up. What now?" Poirot accepted the tea with gratitude. "Now, mon ami, we leave the dead to their rest. The concealed truth is unveiled. A father's ambition, a daughter's devotion, a wife's desperation, a doctor's greed, a son's folly, all braided into a noose. The manor will stand, but the Ishbia hawthorns are finished. They walked the gravel path to the waiting Daimler. Poirot paused at the gate, looking back. The manor loomed, windows now shuttered, the rose garden already reclaiming its thorns. Somewhere inside, a clock struck the quarter hour, its chime faint but clear. "The little grey cells are satisfied," Poirot said. "Another enigma solved. But tell me, Jap, do you not find it poignant? A house built on steel and secrets, undone by ink and blood." Jap grunted. "Poignant or not, they're for the dock. You coming?" Poirot climbed into the Daimler. As it pulled away, he glanced once more at the manor. The white rose in his buttonhole had begun to wilt, its petals curling like paper in flame. He touched it gently. "Adieu, Ashford," he whispered. "Your truth is concealed no longer." The car turned onto the London road, the manor shrinking in the rear window until it was only a silhouette against the rising sun. Poirot closed his eyes, the locket's weight a small, cold presence in his pocket. Another case closed, another family shattered, another dawn breaking clean over the ruins of the night.